Hello and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison. This show explores the most vital, challenging issues facing marketers today, how to build trust and influence decision makers in the ever-evolving B2B landscape. These aren't new challenges, but they've taken on new urgency in an era of digital disruption, social skepticism, and AI-driven change. So episodes are released weekly, so don't forget to subscribe, to rate, and to share. So my guest today is Carla Johnson, who is an old friend and a well-known face in B2B marketing, admittedly several thousand miles away, but someone who I enjoy talking to and speaking to and learning from whenever I can. And she's a globally recognized marketing and innovation strategist, speaker, and author of Rethink Innovation. Carla's helped some of the world's top B2B brands from Emerson and Dell to Intel to reimagine how they inspire creativity, tell authentic stories, and earn lasting trust. She's a leading thinker on the role of trust in storytelling, thought leadership and innovation, and her work often references key frameworks like Edelman's Trust Barometer and her own innovation archetypes. So in this section, we're going to be exploring how trust shapes influence, advocacy, and creativity inside and outside B2B organization, and how leaders can build credibility in an age of AI and information overload. And we're going to learn today, we're going to learn this in this session, you're going to learn why trust is the hidden currency of B2B influence and how storytelling turns credibility into action, how AI, thought leadership, and employee advocacy are reshaping trust between brands and buyers, and what B2B leaders can do today to build high trust cultures that power creativity and innovation. So Carla, no pressure, right? There's not much.
So I don't know who you're talking about, Joel, but it sounds like somebody I'd like to meet.
She's amazing, this woman. She's coming on later on. No, it's lovely to see you today.
It's so great to see you too, across the many miles.
And across the many miles. Yeah, exactly. Well,
I wish we could do this in a pub, but maybe next time.
Yeah, me too. It'd be good. It would be probably a different conversation, certainly after about an hour or so.
More lively, perhaps.
No, I think we can do pretty lively between us, but yeah, it might go to a different couple of places possibly. Anyway, so look, you're a kind of speaker and a consultant, and you work with organizations, lots of big B2B organizations. You're generally an inspirational figure around B2B. You can recognize that description or not, depending on how you feel. You work with countless B2B organizations to rethink how they communicate and innovate. When do you think about trust in business relationships, what does it mean to you personally and professionally?
For me, when I think about trust is that person and is that brand consistently showing up in a way that I expect them to, and in a way that has the same values that I hold dear, held in the same regard. So I think that you and I all know the kinds of people who, around you, they're one person, around me, they're another person, around somebody else, they're a third person, whether it's their interests or the side of their personality that comes out. And that, to me, makes that person hard to trust. Interestingly, there are many brands who show up in the market that seem to be the same way. What's the flavor of the month? Because that's who they are right now. And I think that the biggest part of trust is having an organization that understands what do they stand for, and then having that as an ethos for all employees to live up to. Because unless the organization knows what it stands for, the employees within it don't know what it stands for. And I think knowing what you stand for is a core part of how you build trust with people.
And the employees, if they embody that, then the customers will see it and feel it and know it every day as well.
Exactly, because how many times when you have an interaction, maybe different if you're working with the sales representative or something like that. But if you're calling in for customer service help or support or something like that, the likelihood of you getting the same person every time is almost nil. And so the way to build trust is whoever you talk to shows up and represents the company in the same way. You don't get a different story about what the process is, depending on who you talk to. And that core consistency of how a brand and a person shows up is a key part of how to build trust.
Okay, consistency was that word that was running through everything you said there. So you described creativity and consistency as the twin engines of great marketing. How does trust fit into that equation? Do you think I feel like it's often overlooked. The reason I've been focusing on the podcast, I feel it's often overlooked. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, especially with creativity and innovative thinking, there's always that fear of what if I fail? What if I raise my hand and somebody says, well, that's a dumb idea? Or, what were you thinking? You should already know the answer there. So there's that trust that does my boss, do my coworkers value my ideas, value my question? And I think that's a huge part of people being willing to be vulnerable enough to ask the question. And oftentimes it's a little bit like the Emperor's New Clothes. You get to a point of failure in something that's happened in a project or an execution of a project, and you think, that is so ridiculous. How could they have no idea what a horrible idea that was? Like, nobody told them. And it's because nobody felt safe enough to trust that if they asked the question, the obvious question, that they probably wouldn't lose their job. And I think that, that ability to trust is a key part of creativity and innovation.
Okay, that makes so much sense. One of the things that underpinning talking about trust is we're talking about thought leadership, which is such an interesting topic. In B2B organizations, we're often trying to find and elevate thought leaders. But that's kind of sounds simple, but actually not everyone is naturally kind of fits into that category. From your perspective, what makes a thought leader trustworthy, and what separates genuine expertise from kind of overt self-promotion, kind of self-justifying self-promotion?
Yeah, and I'm going to answer that question in the opposite, starting with the last part of the question. And as you are, I'm a huge fan of Andy Crestodina. And one of the things that Andy talks about when it comes to thought leadership is there needs to be more emphasis on the thought than the leader. And I think we're in an era with influencers and wanting to be the people that everybody points to and all of the glory that can come from a thought leader, that we don't take time to really consider and dive into what is it that we think, because just repeating the obvious at scale is not thought leadership. And Andy talks about you have to have a provocative point of view, put a stake in the ground around that, and be willing to stand for it. And that goes back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago. And I think that willingness to take a stand, which also comes with criticism, I think is a big part of how you build trust as well with your customers and your employees. Like, do you really think that? Do you really believe that? And are you willing to take the heat, the criticism that might come along with it?
That's a really, really great way to describe it. I like that, because it's not just getting the glory. It's not just being credible. It's not just having something good to say and well expressed and saying it well. It's about being able to push yourself that bit further and take the flak. I like that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's what I think of as a thought leader. And the people I look up to and follow the most are like that. They're very provocative in their thinking. Do I agree with all of it? Depends on who it is, and not everybody all of the time. But I like how what they think pushes me to think and reevaluate about what I think myself.
But there is just being a bit of devil's advocate for a second here. We're in this social media world, right, where you're seeing people negatively follow the algorithm, right? Aren't you? Who are being provocative for the sake of being provocative. And that's the downside of that, being having an opinion and trying to stir up reactions. You're not talking about that, are you? You're talking about having something.
No, absolutely not. I think it's provocative from the point of view of what is it that we really think and believe. And I think if what you're saying is your leadership of thought doesn't push other people to the point of getting a little uncomfortable or making them reevaluate what they think, I don't think your thought leadership is actually provocative thinking. And I think to truly be what I define as a thought leader, you have to make some people uncomfortable with your views and expressing them. But, the whole social media algorithm, if the only place that you share your opinions are social media, yes, you can get into a terrible spiral right there. But I think that's also the part of a really effective thought leader, is where and how often and how broad you share your points of view. And it isn't just about, public, especially for B2B, getting consumer belief behind it, but truly who is your audience and what is it that you're wanting them to push and think differently about the world that they're in, that we're trying to create. I mean, I'm sure you and I will dive into a little bit of technology that we're in the midst of right now. And what is your point of view around AI and adoption and what it can do to us as brands and humans? And, don't just repeat and regurgitate what everybody else is thinking. Really, what is it that you believe as a leader in a brand?
It's very interesting. I love the point about discomfort as marketer. It reminds me, it's a complete tangent. One of the marketers I respect most over here is a guy called Brian McCready, and he's a creative marketer who's always striving. He says, he repeats the David Bowie line in a bit. It's like, if I'm not making myself feel uncomfortable, then I'm just not doing my job properly. And I think that's interesting. That's the other side of that argument. You need to make, as a thought, need to make people feel a bit uncomfortable. So yeah, fascinating. Okay, that's great. I love that point. Okay, so we're going to talk, just to dive in and talk a bit more about trust and influence and advocacy. So research constantly shows that B2B buyers trust peers and employees more than brand advertising. So what does that mean for how companies approach influence and advocacy? I mean, surely it means we should be spending more focus on it.
Well, I think that's an interesting statistic, because when it comes to trust, again, going back to consistency and are people saying what I believe is true to them? And I think a lot of brands will say what they believe should be said in the market right now in order to build the revenue. And if we're looking at trust is built over a long period of time. And the reason that most buyers will trust an employee is because, employees know what goes on under the hood. They know the skeletons in the closet, and employees in general, when you look at them one by one, each of them has a bigger social media following than a brand. And so if we can start to look at, okay, what's the employee talking about? What are they saying? Because not all of them have the reins of legal or, somebody telling them, no, here's the thing that you need to say. It's not all crafted and it's not all perfect. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of brands make, is that they're trying to make their message perfectly packaged. And even consistency with perfection can erode that trust, because, Joel, I'm going to have to break this to you. You are not perfect all of the time, but that's a big part of why I trust you. You show up who you are, mistakes and all. And I think in a world where you just talked about, what can happen in social media, when there's that ear to the fear of what somebody's going to say about it, we can oftentimes as brands not show up authentically. And that's an overused word as well, but not show up in a way that has our customers in the best interest, our employees in the best interest, because we're worried about how are we going to look. And we're, trying to smooth things over and do a lot of that. But I think the more that we can take that into account, the better the trust is that we build.
Yeah, it's the authenticity is the word that underpins all of that, and I feel, and then the notion that you can command and control a message. That's just, I think we believe that in the 90s and the noughties, but I don't think no one believes that anymore, right? So it's authenticity and that ability to give people the way to shape and be those messages is so potentially so powerful. In terms of so if we believe that, we buy into that, we believe that people are the best advocates for organization, and that could be anybody in the organization, right? It could be from sales teams to engineers. How do you get them to become authentic advocates without sounding like corporate messages? You've got to set them free to an extent, but where do you find the balance between that freedom and having something that's messages that they need to reiterate in some way?
Yeah, or to say what they meant to say was, well, this to me goes back to the core of branding. And oftentimes I see organizations, especially B2B, okay, we have our mission, we have our vision, we have our, core values. But I think the part that's missing is, what is it that we stand for? Simon Sinek talks about the start with why. I tend to follow Roy Spence about it's not what you sell, it's what you stand for. And once that is aligned and agreed upon at a leadership level, it is amazing how fast trust builds with customers and within employees, and how much freedom it gives employees to make decisions that don't have to keep being delegated up because they're afraid of making a mistake. So when you look at companies, and Southwest Airlines is an easy one, give people the freedom to fly. So if you look at decisions that are made, excuse me, as it trickles down within the organization, they can say, okay, does this decision actually give people the freedom to fly? It could be a financial decision, it could be an operational decision, it could be, decision on a marketing campaign, whatever it might be. But I think the biggest disservice that B2B brands do is that they focus so much on the product and what they're selling that they forget to even ask the question, well, why are we here in the first place? Like, what ultimately are we trying to accomplish here on behalf of our customers?
It's really fascinating. It's a relationship between values and brand and personnel. And I guess, but I think the problem I want to have with conversation about brand in B2B is that often it's a kind of shorthand for advertising. And advertising, in my opinion, advertising is a communication, a illustration, a distillation of your values in a way but it isn't the brand, the values, and it's necessarily in its own right. I think that's wonderful that you can express it that way, and that the values are embodying, and it goes all the way up to the distillation, but then it comes down again into the freedom and the ability and the passion to be able to do it because they really believe in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you tie in the values, and now the values actually have meaning, because when you have that reason for being, that ethos, that purpose, now you tie values to that, and now you can start to describe to an employee, this is what this value looks like in behavior that points to this belief as why we're in business. So now there's so much clarity for employees to understand, oh, okay, if I do this, like that does exemplify that value. But if I do that, that violates it. So it starts to give employees so much more freedom. And when you have freedom as an employee and less fear of consequences, it not only makes you feel more confident, I think it makes employees feel more competent and willing to push their own comfort zones, willing to try some things, willing to stick their neck out. And that right there is what I hear so much from leaders today is, I have teams who will report to me. They will give me the data, but they're not willing to stick their neck out and say, well, what does this actually mean? And what should we do because of that? And I think that all goes back to the trust factor, because they don't trust that if they say something and it's not what their boss wants to hear, there will be consequences.
Yeah, that's so powerful. The freedom to do that, and the autonomy to do that, and the trust to do that is so powerful. You've written a lot about storytelling as a currency of trust. How can B2B brands use storytelling not only to influence buyers, but also to build credibility across their wider ecosystems? I mean, it's such a powerful tool, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of the most powerful interactions I've had with any brands, consumer or B2B, it's always based on a story. Because, I mean, there's a lot of research that shows if we start to try and convince somebody to buy a product, to see our point of view, and we use data to do that, immediately in their brain, they distrust the data because there's no emotional connection with whatever it is we're trying to talk to them about, whether it's the problem, the product, whatever it is. And so when you can start to get people to understand or look at the perspective from the perspective of a story, you bring them in it. So now it's not me talking to you or you talking to me. It's us talking about a scenario. We're talking about Little Red Riding Hood and, oh, good grief, all the mistakes that she made along the way and what she could have done. And, now it becomes a discussion. And then, along the way, I think storytelling is an incredible opportunity for us as marketers to be curious about our customers and find other ways to bring them into the story that we never even imagined. Because I think we as B2B marketers have our agenda for the story we want to tell, or for the information we want to convey, I should say. But there's no role for our customer in that narrative.
And I'm really glad you brought that in, because advocacy is just such a powerful, we all know the power of customer stories. And we could go off on a whole different podcast about this, but it's galling to me how poorly integrated, how much of an afterthought it is to kind of to seek to galvanize that customer voice. Even NPS, great, done, fantastic, great, well done. So we're on the same page. This is an underexploited, under-recognized, undervalued aspect of trust.
Yeah, and I think, because we have so many ways to measure so many things in B2B marketing right now, in a way, I think that makes us incredibly lazy with storytelling, because the ethos I've heard for decades in B2B marketing, if you can't measure it, it doesn't matter. And I don't believe that's true, because I think there's so much behind emotions that we can never measure in the way that we can so many other analytics and B2B marketing, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter, because how can you put a number on an emotional relationship? But that's what builds loyalty.
Yeah, it's really, when it gets them in the heart, it means so much more. So, Carla, we're covering a lot of ground here, but as this is a B2B marketing podcast, we're contractually obliged to talk about AI, right? Have you heard of AI?
I think it's not that. I think so. It sounds slightly familiar.
Yeah, it probably is. You'll probably come back to you as we start talking about it. So AI and automation are transforming B2B marketing. How do you think these technologies are reshaping how B2B brands earn and maintain trust? That is a big question, right? And I appreciate that you've only got, I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer it. You could write a book on that. But tell me what are the things that leap to mind when I ask you that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think one is the opportunity that we have with it. And two, I think, is the reality of what I think will happen with many B2B marketers. And there's a big gap between the two. So I think the opportunity that we have with AI and how it can transform marketing is that it can give us this opportunity to be more creative and more imaginative than we've ever been as B2B marketers. And I think that's one of the big complaints that we've had as B2B marketers is like, we're not the creative ones. Like, we don't sell that kind of product. We don't have that kind of budget. We don't have that kind of boss. There's so many excuses that come about why we can't be creative and show up in more imaginative ways. And I think one of the big opportunities for us is that the thing I hear over and over and over from B2B marketers is, I just don't have the time also. And so AI gives us this amazing opportunity to replace a swath of tasks with AI and automation that takes away so much of our mental energy that can be contributed to creative thinking and imagination and all that space that we say we haven't had forever. So I think that's a huge opportunity. And the other part of that equation is that it won't just think for us, it can think with us. And so if we think about creativity and imagination is all about connecting the dots, you and I in a room, even with our very varied backgrounds and experiences, can only bring so many dots together to connect. And I think that's where AI can be a big help, because it can bring an exponential number of dots into our brainstorming, into our imagination sessions, whiteboarding sessions and strategy sessions, and help us think in ways that we never have had the time or scale to do before. And we don't have to get everybody together. We can set up ways so that Joel is always in my brainstorming session, or I'm in yours, or, some of our favorite creative thinkers. And I think that gives us a way to push the boundaries of what's possible. But the fear that I have, where I think the downfall is that B2B marketers are going to rely too much on AI to do their thinking for them. And I think that's a big part of the detriment. So there's a insurance company in Des Moines, Iowa that I've been studying. And one of the things that they were looking at is their customer experience scores, because what were happening is that in the Midwest of the U.S., tornadoes, rainstorms, all sorts of things that required claims, and customers would call in and they would, their house was gone and they were getting a message, yeah, it'll be a month before you can get a check. Well, in the meantime, where do they live? How do they eat? All of these things. And so the CIO said to a group of the customer service people, they said, okay, I want you to work with ChatGPT and let's figure out some things that we can do to make this a better experience. Now, you think about technology needing to come from, Silicon Valley or, some of these main tech hubs. I mean, this is Midwest America. Des Moines, Iowa is not considered a big tech space. But what he did is he said, let's see what can happen from this and the answers that we get. And so the team of 5 goes and they work with ChatGPT and they come back to the CIO and they said, hey, here's what we have. And he said, you know what? You stopped too soon. Like you have to push it and have it push you. Maybe instead of you asking it the questions, you ask it to ask you the questions and reverse engineer some of this and make this a true back and forth, provocative kind of conversation. And I think that's not something that B2B marketers are necessarily familiar with. They certainly don't have it as a habit, I don't think. And I think it's easy to fill up this time that's been opened up because AI can help us with efficiency and not allow it to truly help us with imagination.
That's a fantastic example. And I totally believe with you that can be a problem. We were talking earlier on there, a lot of people are still at the point where they haven't got onto the journey yet, because it is a relationship is a wrong word. You've got to build up your confidence and your understanding of how it works before you can get to that point. And I feel like a lot of people are still have their heads in the sand about this. And there's no time like now to start, right? You wish you started 6 months ago, but somehow you've got to find the time to get on the road with this stuff.
And I think that's the big thing that I say. I mean, you can't break AI. You can't break Claude. You can't break ChatGPT. You can't break Copilot. You close the tab, you shut your laptop, and it goes away. And then you open it again. And, it's like another new blank canvas. And I think there's so much apprehension, back to our earlier conversation about trust within an organization. Even in our own quiet, safe space, we're afraid that we're going to do something wrong and like somehow somebody will figure it out. You can't do anything wrong. Like AI is never going to laugh at you. It's not going to tell you that was a dumb question. Like it wants to work with you as much as you want to work with it. And I hear people say, quit talking about building a relationship with AI because it's a technology. It's not a human and all these things. But you know what? I have a relationship with my laptop. Every single one of my laptops that I've ever had has a name. And I think for me, it's the emotional state that I have when I go to interact with it. And for me, it's the same way for me, ChatGPT. That's my biggest user. Or that's what I use the most, And so I do anthropomorphize it because I think about it in a human way, as in how would a human push me? If I'm thinking this is just a machine asking me a question, it doesn't bring out my emotional side. It doesn't bring out my imagination. So for me, I think if you look at it as a relationship, it can actually be a benefit, not a weird thing that we're trying to build with an inanimate object.
So, okay, that's fantastic. I love that. And I never thought of a relationship with my laptop, but yeah, I do have one. And it's all based on trust. But look, we've got a lot of questions to get through. I just wanted to crack a few more on because we've not got a great amount of time because it's so fascinating talking to you, Carla. I love your insights and things. We talked about thought leadership earlier on. We talked about that as a key enabler of trust. But AI getting involved with that, as inevitably is happening, we're using it to a greater extent. Do you think there's some challenges associated with trust and using thought leadership in terms of transparency and kind of what you're understanding, who's saying what, things like avatars, for example?
Well, I think there's always this, there's this line where how much trust do we give to technology? How soon? And I think there are tech companies who, because that's the nature of their work, who are probably turning over too much trust too soon. And to the detriment. I mean, I see it in HR and recruiting, where their AI does the first line of filtering through job applicants. And if the AI says you're not a qualified candidate to move to the next level, there is not an opportunity for a human to come in and change that decision. And so I think that part of trust and transparency, I mean, I don't know that that's always communicated to job applicants. And that's just like an obvious example. But I think what we have to always take into consideration is at the end of the day of everything that we're doing, we're serving humans. And technology is a tool. And it's, again, consistently, how do we show up in a way that's consistent with who we are and what it is that we value and what we're trying to accomplish at the end of the day.
Okay. So in your book, Rethink Innovation, you describe innovation as something everyone can do. So how does trust fuel that process, especially in B2B environments that can be risk-averse? I mean, we've covered some of this before.
Yeah, we have. And I think the reason I say that innovation is everybody's business is because when I was doing research for Rethink Innovation, one of the fascinating statistics that I came across is that 90% of innovation happens outside of a traditional innovation group. Now, that could be a team specifically designated as innovation, could be R&D or something like that. And I think that that is the greatest opportunity, because if we put all of the new ideas that we need to drive evolution in our companies on that team, their shoulders would never be big enough, not to mention the budget, to have them solve these problems. And much of the change that needs to happen in organization is that constant small, if you think about compound interest, it's like compound ideas, compound changes, that when we teach employees how to come up with ideas that can have a bottom line impact, and show them that even the smallest ones, when you scale it over 1,000 people, 10,000 employees, whatever it can be, can make a huge difference. Now, when I think about organizations that are truly risk averse, I think one of the reasons that they feel that way is because ideas that are brought to them don't have any context, and they also don't have any business applicability. So when I listen to leaders, they say, my team will come to me with ideas, but they have nothing to do with the business objectives or things we have to deliver. It's an idea, sure, but truly at the end of the day, we have to move our objectives forward as a team, as a department, because that all bubbles up into the objectives that a B2B organization has to deliver. And so I'll talk to the team members and they say, why even bother? Because everything I do, my boss says no to. And they can perceive their boss as being risk averse. And the boss can perceive their team as not being tuned in to what's really important. And so when I built the Rethink Innovation process, the wheel of innovation, one of the things that works so well with it is that it teaches people how to take inspiration from outside of their B2B world, ideally, or at least outside of their team, outside of their company, and connect the dots to share that idea and show why it's relevant and how it relates and how it moves a business objective forward. Sure, rarely does an idea get the thumbs up the first time out of the box, but understanding that when you share an idea and you can give your boss, your client, whoever, context for why that is so relevant, that immediately lowers that feeling of this is too risky.
And that plays across so much of intercompany relationships, right? We have a big thing at B2B Marketing.net about being a commercial marketer, because it's really apparent how many B2B marketers kind of understand they're in a commercial function, but they aren't able to connect what they do every day with the overall objectives of the organization. And if you're able to do that and demonstrate that, then I say I'd like to have a better conversation with your the marketing leader, whoever that might be, and them too with the CFO and the CEO. They've got to be able to talk the right language as well. So I think it's endemic, but it demonstrates to me how powerful what you're saying is, because if you can harness that and if you can communicate that effectively, the opportunities are tremendous.
Well, and one of my favorite examples is Emerson, a company you mentioned that I work with. A 125-year-old industrial manufacturing company in St. Louis, Missouri. Like, there is nothing in those adjectives that makes it seem like it's progressive, open-minded, and all these things. And one of their biggest successful campaigns that they did was an employee engagement campaign around launching their values, where they used as the inspiration the video from Barbie about dads who play with Barbies. And you think, what in the world could be relevant about that to an industrial manufacturing organization? Now, the thing about what I teach in the Wheel of Innovation is that it's not about copying and pasting. The CMO, Kathy Button-Bell, did not say to the executives, I need you to take this Barbie and have a conversation about our values. It's not about cut and paste, but it's about understanding, what is it about that Barbie video that resonated so well, and how can we relate the essence of that into what we're trying to do and generate ideas. So it wasn't about playing with Barbies, but it was about the juxtaposition of these little girls explaining something to their gruff fathers and having an interaction that doesn't usually happen. That's not usually who we think play Barbies in a family. And so what they did, taking that inspiration, is that instead of having an executive explain the new values and rolling them out across the organization, they had the children of Emerson employees describe what these values mean. And that had an incredibly emotional connection. Again, they didn't copy and paste, but they understood how to connect those dots so that all of a sudden this didn't feel like a risky opportunity. And it was a massively successful internal rollout of these new values for the organization.
That sounds really powerful. It's a great example. I love the idea of a pillar of the industrial landscape brand encouraging that kind of content. It's very unexpected. So, Carla, we've talked about so much, and I know that we've not got much time left. But tell us, in summary, what's your vision? What do you think? How do you think B2B companies need to build trust for the next 5 years? Be that with AI, using AI, thought leadership, with advocacy and storytelling. Give us a couple of sound bites around what's going to be important in communicating trust in the next 5 years.
I think one of the biggest things in communicating trust is that you have to be transparent about where and how you're using AI, if it will affect how an employee or a customer can perceive you as a brand. And I think because we can use AI in so many ways doesn't mean we should. And B2B, more than any other kind of business, has to keep that human element front and center. We've talked forever that it's all about people, processes, and technology. I mean, there's more technology than we could ever touch in a day. And I don't think anybody is ever begging for another process to add to our day. But the part that's woefully neglected in all of this is the people part. And I think that our ability as B2B brands, and especially B2B marketers, to make sure that we always keep the human in the loop is the biggest part about how we can continue to build trust as we look forward.
Fantastic. Carla, just about what we've got time for. I could talk to you all day. So thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to talk to you.
It was fantastic. I could talk to you all day about this too, Joel, but
well,
I'm not sure everybody would want to listen to us.
Oh, I think they would. Listen, I say let's do another one of these very soon because we've just scratched the surface in terms of your knowledge. So thanks so much to Carla for being part of this today, and thank you for listening today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please remember to give us a like and subscribe if you're not doing so already. And there's loads more content like this in the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I hope you can subscribe and listen or consume or watch some of that. So, but that's all from me for now. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you can join us again soon.